What would you do if the child you brought into this world lifted his hand, struck you across the face at 95 years old, broke your body, and then forced you out of your own home? What would you do if, for 6 months, you had to sleep on cold sidewalks, search through trash for food, and survive in the streets while your own son slept comfortably in your bed, inside the house your husband spent his entire life paying for? That is what happened to Eleanor Hayes. She was 95 years old. Her body was weak. Her hip was fractured. Her face still carried the marks of violence. And yet, for half a year, the world walked past her as if she did not exist. Until one man saw her collapsed on a footpath, looked closer, and realized exactly who she was. By the time Eleanor Hayes entered my courtroom, I had already read the reports, the medical records, the photographs, the statements. The documented 6 months of homelessness. I had spent 40 years on the bench. I believed I had seen every kind of cruelty a human being could commit. But I was wrong. Because when Eleanor's son, Raymond Hayes, stood in front of me and tried to threaten my courtroom, I made sure he learned something he would never forget. I am Judge Judy, and this is one of those cases that stays with you long after the gavel comes down. Before you understand what happened in court, you need to understand who Eleanor Hayes was. Eleanor was born in 1929. She grew up during hard years, when families stretched every coin, every meal, and every small comfort as far as they could. She learned early that life did not give you much. If you wanted to survive, you worked, you endured, and you kept going. At 22, she married Thomas Hayes. They did not begin with money. They did not begin with comfort. They began with love, patience, and the kind of partnership that builds a life piece by piece. For 58 years, Eleanor and Thomas stood side by side. They worked, they saved, they sacrificed. They bought a home and paid for it slowly or honestly over decades. That house was not just property, it was their marriage, it was their history, it was every year of struggle, every argument they survived, every quiet morning, every family dinner, every memory they had built together. Then Thomas died. 14 months before Eleanor came into my courtroom, she sat beside her husband in a hospital room and held his hand until he took his final breath. 58 years of marriage ended quietly on a Tuesday morning. Eleanor went home alone. She made herself tea. She sat in the kitchen where she and Thomas had shared most of their life. And somehow she kept going, because that was Eleanor. She was not dramatic. She was not helpless. She did not beg the world to feel sorry for her. She simply survived, the way she had always survived. Raymond Hayes was her only child, her only son. And like many mothers, Eleanor loved him long after he had given her every reason to stop. She paid for his schooling. She protected him when others criticized him. She gave him chances when he wasted the first ones. When he struggled as an adult, she helped quietly. When his gambling began to destroy his life, she covered debts, made excuses, and told herself he would change. That is what mothers sometimes do. They keep believing there is still something good inside the child they raised. But Raymond did not see her love as love. He saw it as weakness. Raymond Hayes had a gambling problem. That fact does not excuse him. It only explains the road that brought him to the moment where his 95-year-old mother was lying on a kitchen floor, injured, helpless, and betrayed. By the time Thomas passed away, Raymond had already destroyed his finances. His savings were gone, his apartment was gone, his credit was ruined. Everything his parents had tried to help him build had disappeared into gambling. And then Raymond looked at the last valuable thing left in the family. The house Eleanor still lived in. The house Thomas had worked a lifetime to pay for. The house where Eleanor still kept her husband's photograph, still made tea in their kitchen, still slept in the bedroom they had shared for decades. Raymond wanted it sold. Eleanor said no. She knew what would happen. She had watched him lose money before. She had watched him promise change before. She knew if that house was sold, Thomas's lifetime of work would disappear the same way everything else had disappeared. So she refused. And Raymond decided that if his mother would not give him the house willingly, he would take it from her another way. One Sunday evening, Raymond came to the house carrying property transfer papers. He placed them in front of Eleanor and told her to sign. She looked at him calmly, and she refused. She told him that house was not going to be sold. She told him she would not sign away the last thing Thomas had left behind. And in that moment, Raymond lost control. He raised his hand and slapped his 95-year-old mother across the face. The force knocked her to the floor. Her hip fractured when she fell. She lay there in her own kitchen, calling his name, unable to stand. Raymond stood above her, not helping, not apologizing, not calling an ambulance. He told her the house was no longer hers. He told her to get out. And that same night he changed the locks. The next morning, a neighbor helped Eleanor up. But the neighbors were afraid of Raymond. They did not want conflict. They did not want to get involved. And Eleanor, humiliated and heartbroken, was too ashamed to tell the full truth. So, at 95 years old, with a fractured hip and bruises on her face, Eleanor Hayes went to the street. I want you to pause here and really understand what that means. This was not a young woman with options. This was not someone who could simply start over. This was a 95-year-old widow, injured, starving, and abandoned by the one person who should have protected her. For 6 months, Eleanor slept outside. She lay on footpaths in the cold. She searched near dustbins for scraps of food. Her hip never healed properly because she never received the treatment she needed. Her clothes became dirty and torn. She lost weight so quickly that her bones began to show through her skin. The woman who had once kept a clean home, raised a son, loved a husband, and lived with dignity had become invisible. People walked past her. People looked away. People saw an old woman on the street and kept moving. But in the 3rd week, something unexpected happened. A small stray dog began following her. He was thin, quiet, and cautious. Eleanor named him Harold, after her late husband. That dog slept beside her every night. On the coldest nights, he was the only warmth she had, the only loyalty, the only living creature that stayed. And while Eleanor was lying outside with a broken hip, Raymond was living inside her house. He drank, he gambled, he ran up more debts, and he looked at the property as if it were still his answer. To him, Eleanor was not his mother anymore. She was an obstacle he had removed. And then, one cold Thursday morning, Eleanor's body finally gave out. She collapsed on a busy footpath and did not get back up. People gathered around her. Some watched, some hesitated, some did not know what to do. But one man in that crowd stopped. His name was George Patton. George had been Thomas Hayes's closest friend for more than 30 years. He had not seen Eleanor in over a year. But when he looked at that fragile woman lying on the ground, something made him look again, through the weight loss, through the dirt, through the bruising, through everything the streets had done to her. He recognized Eleanor Hayes. And George did not hesitate, not for a moment. He called an ambulance. He rode with her to the hospital. He paid for her care before anyone asked him. And then he sat beside her bed and waited for her to wake up. When Eleanor opened her eyes and saw George sitting there, she cried. For a long time she said nothing. George did not push her. He had known her for 30 years. He had eaten at her table. He had stood beside her at Thomas's grave, so he held her hand and waited. And when she was finally ready, Eleanor told him everything, the papers, the demand, the refusal, the slap, the fall, the locked door, the 6 months outside, the hunger, the cold, Harold the dog. Everything she had been carrying alone came out in that hospital room. George listened without interrupting. When she finished, he stood up, fixed his jacket, and said 4 words. "We are fixing this." He left the hospital and went directly to an attorney he trusted. By the end of that day, a formal case had been filed: criminal assault, elder abuse, illegal eviction, willful neglect, and the evidence was not weak. It was overwhelming. The medical reports showed the fractured hip. The photographs showed the injuries to Eleanor's face. Social workers documented the months she had spent homeless. Witness statements supported the timeline. Within 48 hours, Raymond Hayes was found at a bar not far from the house he had taken from his mother. He was holding a drink. He was laughing with friends. He was arrested right there. 3 days later, the case came before me. My clerk, Christina, had worked with me for 23 years. After all that time, I could read her expression before I read any document. When I walked into my office that morning and saw her face, I knew this was not an ordinary case. She handed me the file silently. I opened it. The first thing I read was the medical report: fractured hip, severe dehydration, malnutrition, multiple bruises on the left side of the face, consistent with a forceful, open-handed strike. Put at age 95. Then I read the social worker's report: 6 months of homelessness, then George Patton's statement, then the photographs from the emergency room. I put the file down. Christina looked at me. She already knew. Quietly, she said, "I know. I picked up the file again and read the defendant's name, Raymond Hayes, son of the victim. Only child. I have read thousands of case files in my career. Some make you angry, some make you tired, some remind you how deeply broken people can be. But this one was heavier than anger. It sat in my chest. I stood up, straightened my robe and said, "Let's not keep her waiting." At 9 o'clock, I entered the courtroom. Eleanor Hayes was sitting in the third row. She looked small. Her white hair was neatly combed. George had made sure of that. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her spine was as straight as her damaged hip allowed. She did not look vengeful. She did not look loud. She did not even look angry. She looked like a woman who had survived the worst thing a mother could imagine and had come now only to let the truth be heard. Harold, the dog, was waiting outside with George. Then the rear doors opened. Raymond Hayes walked in, and the contrast was almost disgusting. He wore designer clothes. His hair was freshly cut. 2 expensive lawyers walked beside him. He moved through the courtroom with his chin raised, as if this whole proceeding was an inconvenience he expected to eliminate quickly. He walked past his mother's row. He did not look at her. Not once. Eleanor's eyes followed him. He never turned. Then she lowered her gaze back to her hands. I called the court to order. "Raymond Hayes," I said, "you are charged with criminal assault, elder abuse, illegal eviction, and willful neglect. How do you plead?" He adjusted his jacket, then he looked directly at me. "Not guilty, Your Honor. This is a private family matter that has been exaggerated by people who do not understand the situation." I kept my voice even. "Your mother is 95 years old. She has a fractured hip. She has facial bruising documented by 3 medical professionals. She lived on the street for 6 months. Explain to me which part of that you consider private." Raymond leaned toward one of his lawyers for a moment. Then he straightened and looked back at me, and the expression on his face told me everything. He was not scared. He was not ashamed. He was not sorry. He looked like a man who had gone through life believing money, lawyers, and connections could protect him from consequences. "Your Honor," he said, "I want to be very clear. I know some influential people in this city. I think it would be better for everyone, including this court, if this matter were handled quietly and professionally. I would advise against pushing this too far." The courtroom went silent. Christina looked up. The prosecutor stopped writing. Even Raymond's lawyers glanced at each other, and from that look alone, I could tell they knew he had just made a terrible mistake. I placed my pen down slowly. I folded my hands on the bench. Then I looked at Raymond Hayes with 40 years of experience, staring right through him. "Mr. Hayes," I said, "are you threatening this court?" He held my eyes for 1 second too long. Then he said, "I am simply giving context, Your Honor." I said, "I have had organized crime figures stand where you are standing. I have had politically connected defendants attempt to influence proceedings in this courtroom. Not one of them left believing it worked." Then I turned to the prosecutor. "Present everything, every photograph, every report, every statement. This court is going to hear all of it." What followed was one of the most painful hours I have ever presided over. The medical examiner testified first. Her voice was clinical, precise, professional. She described the fractured hip. She described the bruising on Eleanor's face. She explained that the injuries were consistent with a strike from someone larger and stronger. She described the malnutrition, the dehydration, the deterioration of bone strength made worse by months in cold conditions. Each sentence landed heavily in that courtroom. Then the social worker testified. She described seeing Eleanor during the months she was homeless. She described the state of her body, her clothing, her fear, and the small dog that stayed with her and refused to leave her side. Then George Patton took the stand. George was 78 years old. He had known Thomas Hayes for more than 3 decades. He spoke about the morning he found Eleanor on the footpath. He said he almost walked past, then something made him stop. He described what she looked like lying there. He described the hospital room. He described the moment she opened her eyes and recognized him. And as he spoke, George began to cry, quietly, without apology. No one in that courtroom judged him for it, because everyone in that room understood. Raymond sat through the testimony with his arms crossed. His jaw was tight. I watched him carefully. I was looking for something, one moment, one flicker. One sign that a son was hearing what he had done to his mother. One sign of shame. One sign of regret. One sign of pain. It never came. And that told me more than any statement could have. When the evidence was finished, I looked at Raymond Hayes for a long moment before speaking. I thought about Eleanor eating from trash while he slept in her home. I thought about her fractured hip, left untreated. I thought about Thomas Hayes working year after year to pay for that house. I thought about what Thomas would have felt if he could have stood in that courtroom and seen what his son had done. And I thought about Harold, a stray dog who showed Eleanor more loyalty in 6 months than Raymond had shown in years. Then I gave my ruling. Raymond Hayes, this court finds you guilty on all charges. For criminal assault and elder abuse, you are sentenced to 3 years in county jail. You will pay a $20,000 fine. Full property rights are to be returned immediately and permanently to Eleanor Hayes. You are to have no contact with your mother unless she chooses to initiate it. These conditions are final. They are not negotiable. They are not influenced by your connections, your threats, or the price of your lawyers. This is the order of the court. Gasps moved through the room, and Raymond Hayes, the man who had walked into my courtroom less than 2 hours earlier with expensive clothes, expensive lawyers, and arrogant confidence, began to fall apart. His face went white, his hands started shaking. He turned to his lawyers. They had nothing. He looked around the courtroom like a man searching for a door that no longer existed. Then he turned to Eleanor. "Mum," that one word came out small, broken. Nothing like the voice he had used when he tried to intimidate the court. "Mum, please. Please tell them we can fix this. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please don't let them take me. I'm your son. I'm your only son. Please, I'll give everything back. I'll make it right. Just don't let them take me away." Now he was crying, actually crying, reaching toward the same woman he had ignored when he walked in. Eleanor looked at him. The whole courtroom held its breath. She did not reach back. She did not soften. She did not collapse. She remained exactly where she was. Hands folded. Back straight, eyes clear. And then she spoke. "I looked at you every day of your life and believed you were the best thing I ever did. I fed you. I prayed for you. I protected you. After your father died, I held myself together so you would never feel alone." Her voice was calm, steady, no shouting, no trembling. "You took all of that. You took everything I gave you. Then you raised your hand and struck me. You broke my bone. You locked me out of my own home, and while I ate garbage from the street, you slept in my bed." "Nobody moved," Eleanor continued. "My face will never be the same. My hip will never be the same. And for 6 months, every morning I woke up on a cold footpath and wondered what I had done so wrong to deserve a son like you." Raymond reached toward her again. A bailiff stepped forward. Eleanor looked at him one last time. "You are not my son anymore, and I am not your mother. Not anymore." Raymond sobbed. Eleanor did not look away yet. "A mother and son are bound by love, trust, and sacrifice. You destroyed that. You did it deliberately. And I will not stand in this courtroom and ask for mercy for a man who broke my bones for property." She paused. Then she said the words that silenced the room completely. "I forgave you every morning I was on those streets because that is who I am. But forgiveness does not mean I give you my life again. It does not mean I pretend nothing happened, and it does not mean I need you in mine." Then she looked away. Raymond kept saying her name, but she did not answer. The officers came forward and took him by both arms. As they led him away, he looked back once, at his mother, at the courtroom, at everything he had thrown away. Eleanor did not look up. Before Eleanor left that courthouse, full legal ownership of her home was restored to her in writing. Every right Raymond had tried to steal was returned. Every claim he had made was erased. George Patton drove her home, and when Eleanor walked through her front door for the first time in 6 months, Harold was in her arms. She kept him. Of course she did. A few weeks later, George called my chambers to tell me how she was doing. He said Eleanor had repainted her kitchen yellow, her favorite color since she was young. She had placed fresh flowers on the table. She had rehung Thomas's photograph above the fireplace, the one Raymond had taken down. She had arranged her home exactly the way she wanted it. Her house, her rules, her life. George said she was sleeping in her own bed again. He said she laughed more than he had heard her laugh in years. Raymond served his sentence. The house was never his. And Eleanor Hayes, 95 years old, with a hip that would never fully heal and a face that still carried the memory of what her son had done, lived the rest of her days in her own home, with her dog at her feet, with sunlight in her yellow kitchen, with her dignity fully restored. I have been a judge for 40 years. I have sent people to prison. I have handled cases that made headlines. I have seen anger, greed, violence, betrayal, and every form of human selfishness you can imagine. But when someone asks me what justice truly looks like, I think of Eleanor Hayes. I think of a woman who chose herself after losing almost everything. I think of Harold sleeping at the foot of her bed. I think of a yellow kitchen. And I remember why the work matters. Take care of the people who love you, protect the vulnerable. And remember this, dignity can be stolen for a time, but once it is reclaimed, it belongs to you forever.